They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But nobody tells you how sweet it tastes when you watch someone who destroyed you realize they destroyed themselves instead. My name is Alina, and this is the story of how my rich, powerful husband told me I'd regret leaving him. He was absolutely right, just not in the way he thought. It was a Tuesday evening when everything came crashing down. Not the kind of Tuesday you'd remember for any particular reason. Just another ordinary day that turned extraordinary in the worst possible way. I was standing in the marble hallway of our penthouse, the one overlooking the city skyline, the one that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. My suitcase was by my feet. My hands were shaking. And my husband, Marcus Wellington III, was leaning against the doorframe of his study with that infuriating smirk on his face. "You'll regret this," he said, swirling his glass of 30-year-old scotch like he didn't have a care in the world. Like I was nothing. Like the 8 years we spent together meant absolutely nothing. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. This man I'd loved, trusted, built a life with. Now he stood there in his custom Italian suit, his perfectly styled hair, his Rolex catching the light, and all I could see was arrogance. Pure, unfiltered arrogance. "Maybe," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "but I'd rather regret leaving than regret staying one more day." He laughed, actually laughed, that cold, dismissive sound that made my stomach turn. "Alina, sweetheart, you have no idea what you're walking away from. You think you can survive out there without me, without my money, my connections, my name." I didn't answer. I couldn't, because part of me, a small, terrified part deep inside, wondered if he was right. But the bigger part of me, the part that had just discovered what he'd been doing behind my back, knew I had no choice. "You're going to come crawling back," he continued, taking a slow sip of his drink. "And when you do, and you will, things are going to be very different. I won't be so generous next time." I picked up my suitcase. It wasn't even fully packed. Just some clothes, a few personal items, my laptop. Everything else in this penthouse, this golden prison, could burn for all I cared. "Goodbye, Marcus." 3 weeks, he called after me as I walked toward the elevator. "I give you 3 weeks before reality hits you, before you realize what a massive mistake you're making." The elevator doors closed and I saw my reflection in the polished brass, tears streaming down my face, mascara ruined, but something else too, something I hadn't seen in years, a spark, a tiny flame of defiance. He was right about one thing, I would regret this, but not because I'd miss him or his money or his precious name. I'd regret not doing it sooner. And he, Marcus Wellington III, was about to learn what real regret felt like. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you how I took down one of the most powerful men in the city, before I show you how his empire crumbled and that smirk was wiped off his face forever, you need to understand how we got here. You need to know who I was before Marcus, who I became during our marriage, and who I had to rediscover to survive what came next. So let me take you back to the beginning, back to when I actually believed in fairy tales. Smash that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what happens next, you won't want to miss. I met Marcus Wellington 9 years ago at a charity gala in Manhattan. I was 26, fresh out of grad school with a degree in art history and a mountain of student debt. I was working as an assistant curator at a small gallery in Brooklyn, barely making enough to cover my rent in a shoebox apartment I shared with 2 roommates. But I loved it. I loved the art, the creativity, the feeling that I was part of something meaningful, even if it was small. The gala wasn't my scene at all. My boss had gotten food poisoning at the last minute and begged me to attend in her place. She'd already paid for the ticket, already RSVP'd, and the gallery needed to maintain relationships with the wealthy donors who sometimes purchased pieces. So there I was, in a dress I'd borrowed from my roommate, wearing shoes that pinched my toes, completely out of my depth in a room full of Manhattan's elite. I spent the first hour trying to blend into the background, nursing a glass of champagne I was too nervous to actually drink, studying the artwork on the walls because at least that was familiar territory. That's when he approached me. "Interesting choice, stopping in front of the Rothko," a voice said behind me. I turned and there he was. Tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair graying slightly at the temples in that distinguished way some men manage to pull off. Sharp jawline, intense blue eyes, and a smile that was somehow both charming and dangerous. He wore a tuxedo like he was born in it. "I think it's the most honest piece in the room," I replied, surprised by my own boldness. Maybe it was the champagne finally kicking in. His eyebrow raised. "Honest, how so?" "Because it doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. Color, form, emotion. No tricks, no deception, just truth on canvas." He studied me for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Marcus Wellington, and you are?" "Alina Rossi." His handshake was firm, confident. His hand was warm. "Well, Alina Rossi, that's the most interesting thing anyone said to me all evening. Everyone else is too busy kissing up or asking for favors. You actually care about the art." We talked for 2 hours straight. He got me another glass of champagne, then another. We discussed art, philosophy, travel, books. He was smart, wickedly smart, and funny in a dry, sophisticated way. He told me he ran an investment firm his grandfather had founded, that he spent his days dealing with numbers and portfolios and shareholders, and that nights like this reminded him there was more to life than quarterly reports. I told him about the gallery, about my dreams of one day curating a major exhibition, about growing up in a small town in Ohio with parents who thought an art degree was impractical but supported me anyway. He listened, really listened, in a way that made me feel like I was the only person in that crowded ballroom. When the gala ended, he offered to drive me home. I should have said no. I should have taken the subway like I'd planned, but something about him made me say yes. His driver pulled up in a black Mercedes that probably cost more than I'd earn in 5 years. He opened the door for me, and we drove through the glittering streets of Manhattan while he pointed out buildings his company had invested in, restaurants he wanted to take me to, theaters where we could see shows. "Wait," I asked, catching the presumption. He smiled, that dangerous, charming smile. "I'd very much like to see you again, Alina, if you'd allow it." I should have been more careful. I should have seen the warning signs. But I was 26 and drowning in student debt and working 70 hours a week for poverty wages. And here was this successful, gorgeous, sophisticated man looking at me like I was the most fascinating woman he'd ever met. "I'd like that too," I said. He took me to dinner 3 days later. Not just any dinner. A Michelin-starred restaurant where the waiters wore white gloves and the wine list was thicker than my college textbooks. I felt completely out of place, but Marcus made it easy. He ordered for both of us, not in a controlling way, but in a way that felt like he was taking care of me. Like I could relax and just enjoy the experience. Over the next 3 months, he swept me off my feet, and I mean completely, utterly swept me away. Fresh flowers delivered to the gallery every week. Weekend trips to his family's house in the Hamptons. Broadway shows, art exhibitions, rooftop dinners with views that took my breath away. He introduced me to his world, and it was intoxicating. But it wasn't just the money or the luxury. Marcus made me feel special. He'd call me in the middle of his workday just to hear my voice. He remembered small details I mentioned in passing, surprising me with a first edition of my favorite book or tickets to see an artist I admired. He asked my opinions on things, valued my thoughts, made me feel intelligent and important. My friends were skeptical at first. "He's 17 years older than you," my roommate Sarah pointed out. "And he's rich, like seriously rich. What does he want with a broke gallery assistant?" "Maybe he actually likes me," I'd said defensively. "I'm sure he does," Sarah replied carefully. "Just be careful, okay? Men like that, they're used to getting what they want." But I didn't want to be careful. For the first time in my life, something exciting was happening. Someone amazing wanted me, not despite who I was, but because of it. That's what I told myself anyway. 6 months after we met, Marcus proposed. We were in Paris, standing on a bridge over the Seine at sunset, and he got down on one knee with a ring that probably cost more than my parents' house. I said yes before he even finished asking. How could I not? I was in love. Head over heels, completely consumed, can't think straight in love. We got married 3 months later in a ceremony that was featured in Town and Country magazine. 200 guests, most of whom I'd never met. A designer dress that cost $40,000. A reception at the Plaza Hotel with champagne fountains and an 8-tier cake and a string quartet that played while we danced. My parents flew in from Ohio, looking completely overwhelmed by the whole thing. My dad pulled me aside before I walked down the aisle. "You sure about this, sweetheart? You've only known him 9 months." "I'm sure, Dad. I love him." "Love's important," my dad said slowly. "But so is knowing someone, really knowing them, and 9 months, that's not very long. We'll have the rest of our lives to know each other," I'd said with the confidence of someone who had no idea what she was talking about. My dad hugged me tight. "Just remember, you can always come home. No matter what, you always have a place with us." I wish I'd paid more attention to those words. I wish I'd understood why he felt the need to say them. But I didn't. I walked down that aisle in my $40,000 dress, said my vows in front of 200 strangers, and became Mrs. Alina Wellington. I thought it was the beginning of my happily ever after. I had no idea I was walking into a cage. A beautiful, luxurious, gilded cage. The first year of marriage was like living in a dream. Marcus moved me into the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows and marble floors, and a bathroom bigger than my old apartment. He insisted I quit my job at the gallery. "You don't need to work anymore," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind as we stood looking out at the city. "I want to take care of you. Besides, that place was taking advantage of you, working you to death for nothing." "But I love that job," I protested weakly. "You love art," he corrected. "And now you can enjoy it without the stress. We'll travel, visit museums all over the world. You can take classes, pursue your interests without worrying about money. Doesn't that sound better than 70-hour weeks for poverty wages?" When he put it that way, it did sound better. So I quit. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd figure out what I wanted to do next, that I'd maybe volunteer or consult or start my own project. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and somehow I never quite got around to it. Marcus kept me busy. We traveled constantly that first year. Paris, Rome, Tokyo, Dubai, always staying in 5-star hotels, always first-class flights, always the best of everything. He bought me clothes, jewelry, handbags I'd only ever seen in magazines. My closet became filled with designer labels I couldn't even pronounce. "You're my wife," he'd say whenever I protested that something was too expensive. "You represent me now. You need to look the part." Looking the part meant personal trainers and nutritionists and dermatologists and hairstylists. It meant learning which fork to use at formal dinners and how to make small talk with the wives of Marcus's business associates and which charities were appropriate to support. It meant transforming from Alina Rossi, broke gallery assistant with student debt and big dreams, into Alina Wellington, society wife and trophy on Marcus's arm. The strangest part was how gradual it happened. It wasn't like one day I woke up and didn't recognize myself. It was a slow fade. A gentle erosion of who I used to be replaced piece by piece with who Marcus needed me to be. At first, his suggestions seemed helpful. "Maybe wear the blue dress tonight instead of the black one. It brings out your eyes." Or, "Could you skip drinks with Sarah this week? I need you at a client dinner." Or, "Let's not mention your student debt to the Rothschilds. It's not the kind of thing people in our circle discuss." Our circle, that's what he called it. His world that was now supposed to be my world too. A world of charity galas and country clubs and summer homes and people who'd never worried about money a day in their lives. They were polite to me, these people. They smiled and made conversation and complimented my dress. But I always felt like an outsider, like they could smell that I didn't belong, that I was just a girl from Ohio pretending to fit into their world. Marcus's mother, Victoria Wellington, made sure I never forgot it. She was old money personified, elegant, cold, with a smile that never reached her eyes. She had opinions about everything I did, and she wasn't shy about sharing them. "You're holding your wine glass incorrectly, dear. That shade of lipstick is a bit much for daytime, don't you think?" Marcus's previous girlfriend summered in the vineyard. She was a Cabot. Do you know the Cabots? I didn't know the Cabots. I didn't know any of these people or their rules or their games. But I learned. God, did I learn. Because making Victoria happy made Marcus happy, and making Marcus happy became my entire purpose. Looking back now, I can see how unhealthy it was, how I lost myself bit by bit. But when you're in it, when you're living it, you don't notice. Or maybe you do notice, but you tell yourself it's normal. It's compromise. It's what marriage is. By the second year, my friends from before had mostly faded away. Sarah stopped calling after I canceled on her one too many times. My grad school friends drifted off when I could no longer relate to their struggles with rent or jobs or normal life problems. What was I supposed to say? Sorry you're struggling to make your student loan payment. I just bought a handbag that costs more than your car. My world shrank to Marcus and his world. His friends, his family, his schedule, his needs. I told myself I was happy. The penthouse was beautiful. The lifestyle was comfortable. Marcus was attentive and generous. He bought me anything I wanted. Well, anything except my independence. The rules were never explicitly stated, but they were there. Don't make plans without checking with him first. Don't spend too much time on my phone. Don't talk about my old life. Don't embarrass him in front of his associates. Don't gain weight. Don't let myself go. Don't question where he was or who he was with. Trust him. Always trust him. And I did. For 8 years, I trusted him completely. Even when he started working later and later. Even when business trips became more frequent. Even when he'd come home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine and explain it away as a client meeting or a work dinner. You're being paranoid, he'd say with that charming smile. I work in an office full of people, Alina. Of course, I interact with women. That's not a crime. No, it wasn't a crime. But what he was actually doing, that was something else entirely. I think part of me knew. Deep down, in that place we don't like to look too closely at, I knew something was wrong. But I'd given up everything for this life. My career, my friends, my identity. If the marriage was a lie, then what did that make me? What had I sacrificed everything for? So I ignored the signs. I played the perfect wife. I smiled at the galas and looked beautiful on his arm and ran his household and asked no questions. I made myself smaller and smaller, quieter and quieter, until I was barely there at all. Until the day I couldn't ignore it anymore. The day everything came crashing down, and I finally saw my husband for who he really was. And he saw me for who I'd been hiding all along. But that comes later. First, you need to understand just how deep the betrayal went, how long it had been happening, how stupid I'd been to miss it. The cracks started showing in year 6. Small things at first, things I could explain away if I tried hard enough, and believe me, I tried. Marcus became obsessed with his phone. He'd always been attached to it for work, but this was different. He'd take it with him everywhere, and I mean everywhere. To the bathroom, to the kitchen for a glass of water at 2 a.m, even to bed where he'd keep it face down on his nightstand. If it buzzed while we were together, he'd glance at it with this expression I couldn't quite read. Annoyance mixed with something else. Anticipation, maybe. Who keeps texting you so late? I asked one night when his phone lit up for the 5th time during dinner. Work, he said without looking up. The Singapore deal is complicated, different time zones. That made sense. It always made sense. Marcus always had a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything. Then there were the business trips. Marcus had always traveled for work, but the frequency tripled. Hong Kong, London, Los Angeles, Miami. Sometimes he'd be gone for a week, sometimes just overnight. The trips seemed random, last minute. I thought you had that conference next month, I said once, watching him pack yet another suitcase. It got moved up. Client emergency. Which client? He paused just for a second, then smiled that charming smile. The Hartwell account. I told you about it last week, remember? I didn't remember. But then again, I'd stopped keeping track of his deals years ago. They all blurred together after a while. Maybe he had told me and I'd forgotten. Maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. That's what I told myself. The sex changed too. We'd never been particularly adventurous, but there'd been intimacy, connection. Somewhere along the way, that disappeared. He'd come home from his trips and barely touch me. Weeks would go by with nothing but a perfunctory kiss goodnight. Then suddenly he'd be interested again, but it felt mechanical, like he was going through the motions. Like I was an obligation he needed to check off his list. "Is everything okay?" I asked him one night after another awkward, disconnected encounter. "I'm tired, Alina. Work is stressful. Not everything is a crisis." So I stopped asking. I told myself it was normal. Marriages evolved. The passion faded. We were comfortable with each other. Wasn't that what long-term relationships looked like? But then came the receipts. I wasn't snooping, not intentionally. I was organizing his office because the housekeeper was on vacation, and I found a stack of credit card statements he'd left on his desk. I almost didn't look. Almost. But something made me pause. Jewelry stores, high-end boutiques, expensive restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel charges in cities he'd supposedly stayed in for business, but the hotels weren't the ones his company usually used. Duplicate charges, like he was paying for 2 rooms, or maybe 1 room, 2 people. My hands started shaking as I flipped through the statements. Thousands of dollars at Tiffany's. I wasn't wearing any new Tiffany's jewelry. $5,000 at La Bernardin last February. We hadn't been to La Bernardin last February. A weekend at the Four Seasons in Miami when he'd told me he was staying at the Marriott near his client's office. I sat down in his leather desk chair, the statements spread out in front of me, and tried to breathe. There had to be an explanation. Client gifts, business dinners. Maybe the hotel thing was a mistake, a billing error. Maybe I was being crazy, paranoid, exactly what he'd accused me of being the few times I dared to question him. I put the statements back exactly how I'd found them. I didn't say anything, because saying something would make it real, and I wasn't ready for it to be real. Instead, I started paying attention, really paying attention, and once you start looking, you see everything. The way he showered immediately when he came home from trips, even if it was the middle of the day. The new cologne he started wearing, something younger, more aggressive than his usual scent. The gym membership he suddenly got even though he'd never been interested in working out before. The way he'd angle his laptop screen away from me when I walked into a room. I noticed the pattern in his trips too. He'd leave Friday afternoon, come back Sunday evening, 2 nights away. And the places, they weren't always business hubs. Miami, Scottsdale, Napa Valley, places couples went for romantic weekends. One night, I made the mistake of mentioning it. "Another trip. You were just in Miami 2 weeks ago." His jaw tightened. "It's called having a job, Alina. Some of us have to work." The implication was clear. Unlike me, who did nothing all day. Never mind that he'd been the one who insisted I quit working. Never mind that I'd given up my career for him. "I wasn't criticizing," I said quickly. "I just miss you." His expression softened slightly. "I know, I'm sorry. This deal is just really demanding. Once it closes, things will calm down, I promise." But things didn't calm down. They escalated. The trips became longer. His temper became shorter. He'd snap at me over tiny things. The dinner wasn't ready on time. I'd bought the wrong brand of coffee. I was wearing an outfit he didn't like. Nothing I did was right anymore. And the compliments stopped. He used to tell me I was beautiful, smart, interesting. Now he barely seemed to see me. I was furniture, part of the penthouse decor. Mrs. Wellington, who looked good at events and ran the household and didn't ask inconvenient questions. I started having dreams. Nightmares, really. Marcus with another woman. Laughing with her the way he used to laugh with me. Looking at her the way he used to look at me. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, and turn to see him sleeping peacefully beside me. Or more often, see his side of the bed empty, him already gone to the office at 6 in the morning. My therapist, the one I'd started seeing because of anxiety, asked me if I'd considered that my suspicions might be valid. "Have you thought about looking?" Dr. Chen asked gently. "If you're this worried, maybe you need to know the truth." "That would be violating his privacy," I said automatically. "And what about your peace of mind? Your right to know if your partner is being faithful." I didn't go back to Dr. Chen after that session, because she was asking me to do something I was terrified to do. As long as I didn't look, I didn't know. and not knowing was somehow safer than knowing. Until the universe decided I needed to know whether I wanted to or not. It was a Wednesday afternoon in October. Marcus was supposed to be in Boston for a conference. He'd left the day before, kissed me on the forehead in that absent way he had, said he'd be back Friday evening. I was having lunch with Victoria, his mother, at her country club, a monthly obligation I'd learned to endure. She spent 90 minutes criticizing everything from my posture to my choice of salad while I smiled and nodded and counted down the minutes until I could leave. I was walking back to my car when I saw them. At first, I didn't process what I was seeing. My brain couldn't quite make sense of it, because Marcus was supposed to be in Boston. But that was definitely Marcus's car, his black Mercedes, pulling into the parking lot of the Ritz-Carlton just off the highway. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, shopping bag from my lunch with Victoria still in my hand, and watched. The car stopped under the entrance canopy. The valet opened the door, and Marcus stepped out. But he wasn't alone. A woman emerged from the passenger side, young, maybe late 20s, long blonde hair, tight dress, designer sunglasses. She was laughing at something Marcus had said, and he, my husband, had his hand on the small of her back as they walked into the hotel together. Casual, familiar, like they'd done it 100 times before. I couldn't breathe. The sidewalk seemed to tilt under my feet. A car honked, someone telling me to move, but I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at the hotel entrance where they'd disappeared. Then, like a switch flipped, I moved. I don't even remember making the decision. One moment I was frozen, the next I was in my car, pulling into the same parking lot, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I left my car with the valet, walked into that hotel lobby trying to look like I belonged there, like I wasn't falling apart inside. I scanned the lobby, no sign of them. They must have gone straight to the elevators, to a room, together. "Can I help you, ma'am?" the concierge asked. "Yes," I heard myself say. "I'm supposed to meet my husband, Marcus Wellington. Can you tell me which room?" The concierge checked his computer. "I'm sorry, ma'am, we can't give out guest room information." Of course not. I was being ridiculous. What was I going to do? Knock on doors until I found them? Cause a scene in a hotel lobby like some desperate, crazy wife? Except I was a desperate, crazy wife, and I needed to know. I sat in a chair in the lobby with a view of the elevators and I waited. 45 minutes. An hour. People came and went. Business travelers, tourists, couples checking in for romantic getaways. And I sat there in my designer dress with my designer handbag, looking like I belonged in this world, feeling like I was watching my life from outside my body. Then the elevator dinged, the doors opened, and Marcus walked out with her. They looked happy, relaxed. His tie was loosened. Her lipstick was smudged. They weren't touching now, maintaining a careful distance in the public space of the lobby, but the intimacy was obvious. The way they moved together, the way she looked up at him, the way he smiled at her. I'd forgotten Marcus could smile like that. Open, genuine, unguarded. He hadn't smiled at me like that in years. They walked right past where I was sitting. They didn't see me. Why would they? I was invisible. I'd made myself invisible for 8 years, becoming exactly what Marcus needed me to be, fading into the background of his life. But I saw them. I saw everything. I saw him hand the valet ticket to the attendant. Saw him say something that made her laugh, that bright, carefree laugh. Saw him casually check his phone, probably making sure I hadn't called, hadn't interrupted his afternoon with his mistress. The Mercedes pulled up. He opened the door for her and she slid in. He walked around to the driver's side, and that's when it happened. That's when he looked up and our eyes met across the parking lot. For a moment, everything stopped. His expression went from relaxed to shock to something else. Fear, annoyance, it was hard to tell. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 3 seconds. Then he got in the car and drove away. I sat there in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton, shaking so badly that a staff member came over to ask if I was all right. I said I was fine. I said it automatically, the way I'd been saying it for years. Everything's fine. I'm fine. We're fine. But nothing was fine. Nothing had been fine for a long time. I'd just been too scared to admit it. I drove home in a daze. I don't remember the drive. I don't remember parking in our building's garage or riding the elevator up to the penthouse. I don't remember walking inside or sitting down on the couch or staring at the wall as the afternoon light faded into evening. I just remember thinking, over and over, what do I do now? What do I do now? What do I do now? My phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. We need to talk, I'll be home by 8. We need to talk. Like this was a business meeting. Like he was the one setting the terms, controlling the narrative, deciding how this conversation would go. That's when something inside me shifted. A tiny spark of anger cutting through the shock and pain and humiliation. He was going to come home and explain this away. He'd have a story ready. He'd make me feel crazy for doubting him, paranoid for following him, hysterical for being upset. He'd twist this around until somehow, it became my fault. I knew this because I knew Marcus. I'd spent 8 years learning how he operated, how he manipulated situations to his advantage, how he always came out on top. But not this time. This time I needed the truth, all of it. I grabbed my laptop and I did what I should have done months ago. I logged into our joint credit card accounts. The ones I had access to but had stopped checking because Marcus handled the finances. Because I'd learned not to ask questions about money. I pulled up 6 months of statements, and I started reading. The credit card statements told a story, a detailed, time-stamped, itemized story of my husband's double life. Hotels, dozens of hotel charges. Some I recognized from his business trips, but many I didn't. The 4 seasons in Miami, multiple times. The peninsula in Los Angeles. The St. Regis in New York, which made no sense because we lived in New York. Why would he need a hotel room in the city where we had a penthouse? Unless he was meeting someone, unless he needed somewhere private, somewhere I'd never show up unexpectedly. Restaurants, not business dinner restaurants, romantic restaurants. The kind with dim lighting and intimate tables and wine lists that cost more per bottle than most people spend on groceries in a month. Reservations always for 2. Jewelry, Tiffany's, Cartier, Van Cleef, and Arpels. Thousands and thousands of dollars in jewelry I'd never seen. Gifts for them. Who knew how many there were? I pulled up our bank statements next. Money transfers I didn't recognize. Payments to an LLC I'd never heard of. Withdrawals of cash, 500 here, 1,000 there. Money that disappeared into the void of whatever life Marcus was living when he wasn't with me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. I opened his email next, the shared iCloud account he didn't know I had access to because I'd set it up years ago and he'd forgotten. I'd never looked before, never had a reason to, never wanted to be that wife. But I was that wife now. The wife whose husband was caught leaving a hotel with another woman. The wife who'd ignored every red flag and convinced herself she was paranoid. The wife who deserved answers even if finding them destroyed me. The emails loaded, thousands of them. I didn't know where to start, so I searched for hotel. Pages and pages of confirmations, bookings in cities across the country, some matching his business trips, many not. Then I searched for reservation. More restaurants, weekend getaways, a cruise I knew nothing about, a vacation rental in Turks and Caicos during a week he'd told me he was at a business summit in Chicago. I was crying now, tears streaming down my face, but I couldn't stop looking. I needed to know. I needed to see the full extent of what he'd done. I found the travel confirmations next. Flights booked for 2. M. Wellington and A. Morrison. A. Morrison. She had a name. She was a person, a real person he'd taken on trips and vacations while I sat in our penthouse alone, waiting for him to come home. Amanda Morrison. I typed her name into Facebook with shaking fingers. Her profile was private, but I could see her profile picture. The blonde from the hotel. Younger than me, prettier than me, thinner than me. Everything I'd been desperately trying to stay but couldn't compete with because she was 28 and I was 35, and time doesn't care how much money you spend on creams and procedures. Her location said New York, her employer. My stomach dropped. Wellington Investments. She worked for him. She worked at his company. This wasn't some random affair. She was his employee. He saw her every single day. While I was home alone in our penthouse, he was at the office with her. How long? How long had this been going on? I went back to the credit card statements, scrolling back further. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. The charges were there, scattered through all of it. Hotel rooms and dinners and gifts going back almost 4 years. 4 years, a third of our marriage. He'd been cheating on me for a third of our marriage. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. Violently, painfully, until there was nothing left. Then I sat on the cold marble floor and sobbed. Huge, gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal. The sound of something breaking that can't be fixed. My phone buzzed, another text from Marcus. Leaving now, home in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. I had 20 minutes to pull myself together, to decide what to say, how to handle this, who I needed to be in the conversation that was about to happen. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, mascara running down my face, eyes swollen and red, hair a mess. I looked destroyed. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman whose life had just imploded. I washed my face, fixed my hair, changed out of the dress I'd worn to lunch with Victoria and into jeans and a sweater. I needed to feel like myself, whoever that was, not Mrs. Wellington in her designer clothes and perfect makeup. Just Alina, just me. I heard the elevator ding, the penthouse door opening, his footsteps in the hallway. Alina. I walked out of the bedroom. He was standing in the living room, still in his suit from earlier, looking nervous. Actually nervous. I'd never seen Marcus nervous before. We saw each other today, he started, his voice careful. At the Ritz, I know that looked bad. Looked bad, I repeated. My voice sounded hollow, distant. I can explain. It's not what you think. What do I think, Marcus? He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. You think I'm having an affair, but it's more complicated than that. I almost laughed. Almost. More complicated than you sleeping with your employee and taking her on trips and buying her jewelry and lying to me for 4 years. His eyes widened. You went through my emails. Yes, I went through your emails, and the credit cards, and the bank accounts. I know everything, Marcus, so please don't stand there and insult me by pretending this is complicated. It's actually very simple. You've been cheating on me for years. He was quiet for a long moment. Then his expression changed. The nervousness disappeared, replaced by something colder, harder. You went through my private emails, my accounts. That's a violation of trust, Alina. I violated trust. Are you seriously saying that right now? What did you expect me to do? His voice was rising now, getting defensive. You've been checked out of this marriage for years. You're just a shell of a person, wandering around this apartment with nothing to do, no purpose, no personality. Do you know how boring you've become? The words hit like physical blows. I gave up everything for you. My career, my friends, my entire life. Because you asked me to. Because you wanted a wife who'd be available for your schedule, who'd look good at your events, who'd run your household. I became exactly what you wanted me to be. I wanted a partner, he shot back. Someone interesting. Someone I could actually have a conversation with, not someone who just agrees with everything I say and has no opinions of her own. You trained me not to have opinions. Every time I disagreed with you, you made me feel stupid. Every time I wanted to do something on my own, you made it impossible. You molded me into this person, and now you're mad that I'm not someone else. Amanda is someone else, he said, and hearing him say her name out loud in our home was somehow worse than everything else. She's ambitious, driven, passionate about her work. She challenges me. She makes me feel alive. Then why didn't you just leave me? Why sneak around? Why keep me here like some pathetic placeholder while you lived your real life with her? He looked at me like the answer should be obvious. Because I don't want to leave. I like my life. I like coming home to a well-run household. I like having a wife who looks good at events. I like the stability. Why should I give that up? I stared at this man I'd loved, married, built a life with, and he was a complete stranger. Or maybe I was finally seeing him clearly for the first time. You want both, I said slowly. You want your mistress and your wife, your excitement and your stability, everything on your terms. It's not ideal, he admitted. But yes, and it was working fine until you decided to follow me like some jealous stalker. It was working fine for you. It could work for you too if you'd let it. Alina, be realistic. What are you going to do? Leave, and go where? You have no job, no career, no money of your own. This is your life now. I'm your life. And I'm willing to continue supporting you, giving you everything you could possibly need, as long as you can be reasonable about this. Reasonable. Yes, reasonable. We can establish some boundaries, be more discreet. You look the other way, I'm more careful. Plenty of couples have arrangements like this. He actually believed this. He actually thought I would agree to this. And if I'm not reasonable, I asked quietly. That's when he smiled. That smirk I described at the beginning of this story, the one that told me he thought he'd already won. Then you'll regret it. You'll file for divorce and you'll get what the prenup says you get, which, if you remember, isn't much. You signed an ironclad agreement that you get $500,000 if we divorce before 10 years. That might sound like a lot to someone like you, but it'll run out fast when you're used to this lifestyle. You'll be back in some shitty apartment, working some shitty job, struggling to pay bills while I'm still here, still successful, still living my best life. Someone like you, the condescension in those words, the absolute certainty that he had all the power. You have no leverage, Alina, he continued. No proof of anything that would break the prenup. New York is a no-fault divorce state. My infidelity doesn't matter. You'll get your $500,000 and that's it. So you can either accept reality and make this work, or you can throw a tantrum and end up with nothing. He picked up his scotch, the same glass from that opening scene I described, swirled it like he didn't have a care in the world. I'm going to my study, he said. I suggest you think very carefully about what you want to do, because if you walk away from this marriage, you'll regret it. You'll regret it for the rest of your life. I stood there in our living room, shaking with rage and humiliation and heartbreak, and I made my decision. I walked to our bedroom, I pulled out a suitcase, I started packing. I heard him come out of his study, heard his footsteps behind me, and that's when we had the conversation from the opening. The one where he told me I'd regret this, where he gave me 3 weeks before I came crawling back. The elevator doors closed on his smirking face, and I walked out of that building into the cold October night with one suitcase, $500 in cash from my wallet, and absolutely no idea what I was going to do next. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Marcus Wellington was right. I was going to regret this. I was going to regret every single thing about our marriage. And I was going to make sure he regretted it even more. I spent the first night in a hotel, not the kind Marcus and I would have stayed in, not the kind with marble lobbies and turn-down service and chocolates on the pillows. A Holiday Inn near the airport where they didn't ask questions and took cash, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear the couple arguing next door. I sat on the scratchy comforter in that generic room and I cried. I cried for hours, for the marriage that had been a lie, for the 8 years I'd wasted, for the person I'd been before Marcus, the one I'd lost somewhere along the way. I cried until I had no tears left, until I was empty and exhausted and numb. Then I opened my laptop, and I started to think. Marcus believed he held all the cards. The money, the power, the prenup, the connections. He thought I was helpless. A shell of a person with no resources and no options. He'd spent 8 years making sure I believed that too, making me dependent, isolated, convinced that I was nothing without him. But here's what Marcus forgot, or maybe he never knew in the first place. Before I was Mrs. Wellington, before I was the quiet, obedient wife in designer clothes, I was Alina Rossi. I had a graduate degree from Columbia. I'd worked in the art world, an industry built on relationships and research and knowing where to find information that people wanted to keep hidden. I'd been smart once, capable, independent. I'd just forgotten. He'd made me forget. But sitting in that hotel room with my entire life in ruins around me, I started to remember. The prenup was airtight. Marcus was right about that. I'd signed it a week before our wedding, too in love and too naive to really read the fine print. My lawyer now, the one I'd consulted the next morning, confirmed it. $500,000 if we divorced before 10 years. That was it. Unless. Unless what? I'd asked, leaning forward in her office. Jennifer Martinez, divorce attorney, looked at me over her glasses. Unless you can prove he hid assets during the marriage, or unless you can prove fraud. The prenup has a clause that voids it if either party engaged in fraudulent behavior that materially affected the marriage. Fraud, like cheating. No, New York is no fault. His affair doesn't matter legally, I'm sorry. Fraud would be financial. Hiding money, lying about assets, that kind of thing. My mind was racing. What about using marital funds for the affair? He spent our money on her. Hotels, gifts, trips. Doesn't that count? Jennifer shrugged. It's scummy, but it's not fraud in the legal sense. You'd need something bigger. Evidence that he's been systematically hiding money or assets from you. Do you have any reason to believe he might be doing that? I thought about Marcus, his obsession with control, his secretiveness about certain aspects of the business, the LLC I'd seen transfers to but couldn't identify, the way he'd always insisted on handling all the finances, keeping me in the dark about the details. Maybe, I said slowly. How would I find out? You'd need access to his business records, bank statements, tax returns, corporate filings, emails, anything that might show money going places it shouldn't. I already had his emails, but I needed more. I needed to understand his business in a way I'd never bothered to before, because I'd trusted him, because I'd believed the man I married was honest, even if he was a cheater. But what if he wasn't? What if there was more he was hiding? I spent the next week in that hotel room doing research. Real research, the kind I used to do tracking down provenance on artwork, following paper trails and connecting dots. Except instead of authenticating a painting, I was authenticating my husband's business dealings. Wellington Investments was a private equity firm. They bought companies, restructured them, sold them for profit. It was all very legitimate and above board. Marcus's grandfather had founded it in the 50s, his father had grown it in the 80s, and Marcus had taken over 15 years ago. They managed billions in assets for high-net-worth clients. I started reading everything I could find. Annual reports, press releases, articles in financial publications. I created spreadsheets. I mapped out the corporate structure. I went through every email in Marcus's account, thousands of them, looking for anything unusual. And I found something small. A mention in an email from 3 years ago about a deal in the Cayman Islands. A reference to an account number I didn't recognize. Marcus's reply was carefully worded, saying they should discuss this in person, not over email. The Cayman Islands, offshore accounts, places where rich people hid money from the government, from their spouses. I dug deeper, more emails, carefully searching for terms like offshore, Cayman, private account. There wasn't much. Marcus was too smart to put everything in writing, but there were breadcrumbs, tiny references that didn't make sense unless you were looking for them. A wire transfer to a law firm in the Caymans. A mention of a special purpose vehicle that wasn't in any of the corporate documents I could find. An email about structuring a deal in a way that would minimize visibility. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was a thread. And I'd learned a long time ago that if you pulled the right thread, sometimes the whole thing unraveled. I needed help, professional help, but I'd burned through most of my cash on the hotel and Jennifer's retainer fee. I had credit cards, but they were joint accounts, and using them would tell Marcus exactly where I was and what I was doing. I needed money, my money. That's when I remembered the jewelry. Over 8 years, Marcus had given me hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of jewelry. Necklaces, bracelets, earrings, rings, most of it I never wore. It sat in a safe in our bedroom closet, collecting dust, expensive and meaningless. Except it wasn't meaningless anymore. It was leverage. I called the penthouse landline at 2 in the afternoon, when I knew Marcus would be at the office. The housekeeper, Maria, answered. "Maria, it's Mrs. Wellington. I need you to do something for me and not tell Mr. Wellington." There was a pause. Maria had been with us for 5 years. She'd seen the slow deterioration of our marriage. She'd probably known about the affair before I did. "What do you need?" she asked quietly. 20 minutes later, Maria met me at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the penthouse. She handed me a shopping bag containing every piece of jewelry from the safe. "He hasn't noticed," she said. "He hasn't been in the bedroom much. I think he's sleeping in the guest room." Already moving on, already rearranging his life without me. "Thank you, Maria," I said. "And I'm sorry, I know this puts you in a difficult position." She squeezed my hand. "You were always kind to me, Mrs. Wellington. He wasn't to any of us." I sold the jewelry that afternoon, not to a regular jeweler. They'd ask too many questions, maybe even call Marcus to verify. Instead, I went to a private buyer Jennifer had recommended, someone who dealt with divorcing women who needed quick cash and discretion. He gave me $230,000, probably a quarter of what the jewelry was actually worth, but I didn't care. It was enough to survive, enough to investigate, enough to fight back. With money in my account, I hired a forensic accountant. His name was David Chen, and he specialized in finding hidden assets in divorce cases. He was expensive, but Jennifer said he was the best. "Give me everything you have," David said at our first meeting. "Emails, statements, anything." I gave him access to Marcus's email account. I gave him the credit card statements and bank records. I told him about the Cayman Islands references and the LLC transfers. "How long will this take?" I asked. "Depends on what he's hiding and how well he hid it. Could be weeks, could be months. Are you prepared for this to be a long fight?" I thought about Marcus's smirk, his absolute confidence that I'd come crawling back, his certainty that he'd won. "However long it takes," I said. While David worked on the financial investigation, I started rebuilding my life, the life I'd abandoned 8 years ago. I found an apartment, nothing like the penthouse, a 1-bedroom in Queens that cost more per month than I'd thought possible, but was still the cheapest I could find. It had old appliances and scratched floors and neighbors who played music too loud. It was perfect. I bought furniture from IKEA, assembled it myself, sitting on the floor with an instruction manual, crying and laughing at the absurdity of it. 8 years ago, I'd been doing this same thing in my Brooklyn apartment. Now I was doing it again, like I'd been in some kind of suspended animation and was finally waking up. I reached out to old contacts, people from grad school, from the gallery, from before. Most of them didn't respond. Too much time had passed, too many burned bridges, but a few did. Sarah, my old roommate, called me back the same day I texted her. "Oh my God, Alina, I've been so worried about you. You just disappeared." "I know, I'm sorry, I lost myself for a while." "Are you okay? What happened?" I told her everything. The affair, the confrontation, leaving. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said exactly what I needed to hear. "That bastard, that absolute bastard. What can I do? How can I help?" "Just be my friend again. I need people who knew me before, who remember who I used to be." "You're still you, Alina. You just forgot for a while, but you're back now." Was I back? I wasn't sure. The person I'd been before Marcus felt like a stranger. And the person I'd been during the marriage, that quiet, obedient shell, I never wanted to be her again. Maybe I needed to be someone new. Someone who combined the best parts of who I'd been with the strength I'd learned from surviving who I'd become. 3 weeks after I left, Marcus called. Right on schedule, exactly when he'd predicted I'd come crawling back. "Alina, I think we've both had time to cool down. Why don't you come home so we can discuss this like adults?" "I am home," I said, "and there's nothing to discuss." "Don't be childish. You've made your point. You were upset you left, I understand. But it's time to be realistic now. Come back and we'll figure this out." "There's nothing to figure out, Marcus. I want a divorce." Silence. "Then you're serious?" "Completely." "You'll get 500,000, Alina. That's it. And then you're on your own. No more credit cards, no more penthouse, no more lifestyle. You'll be struggling to make rent while I move on with my life. Is that really what you want? Yes, I said, and I meant it. You're making a huge mistake, but fine. Have your lawyer contact mine. Let's get this over with. He hung up. No attempts to win me back. No declarations of love or promises to change. Just cold, transactional. The same way he'd probably end things with Amanda when he got bored of her. His lawyer contacted Jennifer the next day. Standard divorce proceedings. They'd give me my $500,000, I'd sign away any claim to anything else, we'd both move on. Quick, clean, exactly what the prenup said. Except I wasn't signing anything. Not yet. Not until David finished his investigation. Stall them, I told Jennifer. Tell them I need time to review everything. Tell them I'm emotional and need to process. Tell them whatever you need to tell them, but don't let this move forward until David finds what he's looking for. And if he doesn't find anything, then I'll take my $500,000 and disappear. But I don't think that's going to happen. I was right. 6 weeks after I left Marcus, David Chen called me with news that changed everything. I found it, he said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. I found what he's been hiding. We met at his office that afternoon. He had printouts spread across his conference table, documents and spreadsheets and bank statements that meant nothing to me, but clearly meant something to him. Your husband is very clever, David said, but not quite clever enough. He's been moving money offshore for years, millions of dollars, maybe tens of millions. It's hard to say exactly without access to the accounts themselves, but I can trace the transfers. My heart was pounding. How? Shell corporations. He sets up a company, usually in Delaware or Nevada, where filing requirements are minimal. The company does a deal with Wellington Investments, pays fees or commissions that are just high enough to be plausible, but not high enough to raise red flags. That money then gets transferred to offshore accounts in the Caymans, Singapore, Switzerland. It's a classic asset-hiding scheme. Is it illegal? That depends. If he's paying taxes on it and declaring it properly, maybe not. But something tells me he's not. And even if it's technically legal, it's definitely fraud as far as your marriage is concerned. He's been systematically hiding marital assets, money that should have been disclosed in the prenup process and throughout your marriage. How much are we talking about? David slid a spreadsheet across the table. Based on what I can trace, at least $20 million over the past 8 years, probably more. This is just what I can find from the emails and transfers you gave me access to. The actual amount could be significantly higher. $20 million, hidden away in offshore accounts while he told me I'd be nothing without him, while he held the threat of the prenup over my head like a weapon. What do we do with this? I asked. We use it as leverage. His lawyer thinks this is a simple prenup divorce. $500,000 and done. But if he's been committing fraud, the prenup is void, which means you're entitled to half of everything, including the money he's been hiding. Would it go to trial? Probably not, once we show his lawyer what we have. They'll push for settlement. The last thing Marcus wants is this becoming public. If we take it to court, everything comes out. The offshore accounts, the potential tax evasion, all of it. It would destroy his reputation, possibly trigger audits and investigations. He'll pay to make it go away quietly. I looked at the documents spread across the table. Evidence of years of deception. Not just the affair, but financial fraud. My entire marriage had been built on lies. What do you need from me? I asked. Authorization to dig deeper. This is enough to void the prenup, but if we want maximum leverage, we need more. I need to know exactly how much he's hiding and where. That means getting access to records he doesn't think we can reach. How do we do that? David smiled. That's where things get interesting. Does your husband keep any business records at home? A home office, maybe? Files, hard drives, anything like that. I thought about Marcus's study. The locked filing cabinets. The safe I'd never been given the combination to. The computer he was so protective of. Yes, I said, but I don't have access anymore. Do you still have your key to the penthouse? I did. Marcus hadn't asked for it back, probably assuming I'd never have the nerve to go back there. I can't just break into his office and steal documents. That's illegal. You're not stealing. You're retrieving items from your marital home that you have every legal right to access. Any documents in that penthouse are potentially marital property. You're allowed to review them as part of the divorce proceedings. He'll know I was there. So, what's he going to do? Call the police on his wife for entering her own home. That would raise questions he doesn't want raised. I thought about it. The risk versus the reward. The fear of confronting Marcus's space again versus the chance to finally have real leverage. When? I asked. Whenever you're ready. I went that night. I knew Marcus's schedule down to the minute. Thursday nights he had dinner with clients, always running until at least 10. That gave me 3 hours. I stood outside the building where I'd lived for 8 years, my hand shaking as I held the key card. The doorman was new, someone hired after I left. He nodded at me without recognition, just another resident coming home. The elevator ride up felt like it took forever. When the doors opened to the penthouse, I half expected Marcus to be standing there, waiting. But the apartment was empty, dark, quiet. I used my phone flashlight instead of turning on the lights. Less chance of being noticed. I went straight to his study, to the room I'd been discouraged from entering throughout our marriage. His private space. His sanctuary. The filing cabinets were locked, but I knew where he kept the keys. In his desk drawer, in a little wooden box that had belonged to his grandfather. Some things he was predictable about. I opened the first cabinet. Tax returns, corporate documents, contracts. I photographed everything with my phone, working as quickly as I could, my heart hammering every time I heard a sound from the hallway or the street below. The second cabinet had personal files, passports, insurance documents, titles to cars and properties. And there, in the back of the bottom drawer, a folder labeled private accounts. Inside were statements from banks I'd never heard of. Accounts in the Cayman Islands, Singapore, Luxembourg, just like David had said. Millions of dollars across multiple accounts. Money that had been earned during our marriage but hidden from me. Money he'd claimed didn't exist while telling me I'd be nothing without his $500,000. I photographed every page. My hands were steadier now, my fear replaced by cold anger. He'd lied about everything. The money, the marriage, all of it. He'd played me for a fool while stashing away a fortune I knew nothing about. The safe was harder. It was biometric, requiring his fingerprint. I couldn't get into it. But I didn't need to, I had enough. I was about to leave when I saw his laptop on the desk. Open, unlocked, like he'd left in a hurry and forgotten to shut it down. I shouldn't, I'd already pushed my luck. But I sat down and opened his email. Not the iCloud account I already had access to. His work email, the one on the private Wellington Investments server. I created a forwarding rule, something I'd learned from a documentary I'd watched about corporate espionage. Every email he received or sent would now automatically forward to an account I'd created. He'd never know. The rule was buried in settings most people never checked. Then I went through his recent emails. There were dozens from Amanda, not sexy or romantic, mostly logistics. Meeting times, travel plans, coded language that probably meant something to them. But there were other names too, other women. This wasn't just about Amanda. This was a pattern. Marcus had been cheating throughout our entire marriage, possibly with multiple women. I felt sick, but I kept reading. And then I found something that made everything else pale in comparison. An email chain from 2 months ago. Marcus and his lawyer discussing the prenup. Discussing me. Discussing how to protect assets if I ever filed for divorce. And there, in black and white, Marcus wrote, "She'll never figure it out. Alina's not smart enough to understand the financial structures, and even if she hired someone, we've buried it too deep." Not smart enough. After 8 years of making me doubt myself, of treating me like I was incapable of understanding anything complex, there it was. Written proof that he'd always seen me as stupid, as less than, as someone to be manipulated and controlled. I took a photo of that email too, not because I needed it for the divorce, but because I needed to remember. I needed proof that my instincts had been right, that I wasn't crazy or paranoid or overly sensitive. He really had been gaslighting me for years. I left the penthouse at 9:30, plenty of time before Marcus came home. I walked out of that building for what I knew would be the last time, carrying the evidence that would destroy him. The next morning, I gave everything to David. He spent 2 days reviewing it all, cross-referencing the documents with what he'd already found, building an airtight case. "This is better than I hoped," he said finally. "He's got at least 30 million in offshore accounts, probably closer to 40, and there's no way he's been paying proper taxes on all of it. This isn't just divorce fraud, Alina. This is potentially criminal." "What happens now?" "Now we tell his lawyer what we have, and we make them an offer." Jennifer drafted the letter. It was beautiful in its simplicity. We knew about the offshore accounts. We had documentation. The prenup was void due to fraud. We were prepared to go to court and make everything public unless Marcus agreed to our terms. Our terms were simple: a full forensic accounting of all his assets, foreign and domestic, a fair division of marital property, alimony, and most importantly, a non-disparagement clause with teeth. He couldn't say a word against me, publicly or privately, or the settlement was void and everything became public. We sent the letter on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Marcus's lawyer called requesting a meeting. The meeting took place in Jennifer's conference room. Marcus's lawyer, Richard Sterling, was exactly what you'd expect. Silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of attorney who charged $1,000 an hour and was worth every penny. He'd probably gotten Marcus out of countless tight spots over the years. But not this one. Marcus wasn't there. Richard had come alone, which told me everything I needed to know. Marcus was too angry, too volatile to be trusted in a negotiation right now. He'd sent his attack dog to handle it. "My client disputes your allegations," Richard began, sliding a folder across the table. "The accounts your investigator found are legitimate business holdings, properly documented and taxed." David didn't even open the folder. "Then he won't mind us depositing our evidence with the IRS for review. I'm sure they'd be very interested in the transfers we've traced." Richard's jaw tightened. "There's no need for threats." "It's not a threat," Jennifer said calmly. "It's a statement of fact. Your client committed fraud. He hid tens of millions of dollars in marital assets. The prenup is void. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, Mrs. Wellington is entitled to her fair share." "What are you asking for?" Jennifer slid our proposal across the table. I watched Richard's eyes move down the page, his expression getting darker with each line. "This is ridiculous," he said finally. "You're asking for half of everything plus alimony plus the penthouse plus restrictions on his speech. You're trying to destroy him." "No," I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken since the meeting started. "I'm trying to get what I'm legally entitled to, what I would have gotten if he'd been honest from the beginning. He destroyed himself." Richard looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Maybe he'd expected the quiet, broken woman Marcus had described, the one who'd be easy to intimidate and dismiss. "My client will never agree to this," he said. "Then we'll see him in court," Jennifer replied. "And every detail of his financial fraud will become public record, along with evidence of his multiple affairs, his misuse of marital funds, and his attempts to hide assets. How do you think his investors will feel about that? His board, the press?" We all knew how they'd feel. Wellington Investments was built on trust and reputation. A scandal like this would be devastating. Clients would flee, the board might force him out, his carefully constructed empire would crumble. Richard gathered his papers. "I'll discuss this with my client, but I'm telling you now, there's no way he agrees to all of this." "Then counteroffer," Jennifer said, "but make it reasonable, because Mrs. Wellington has been very patient, but patience has limits." Richard left. Jennifer, David, and I sat in the conference room in silence for a moment. "Do you think he'll agree?" I asked. "He'll counter," Jennifer said. "Probably offer you less money and push back on the non-disparagement clause. Men like Marcus hate being told they can't talk. But yes, I think we'll get most of what we're asking for. The evidence is too strong." She was right. The counteroffer came 3 days later, $20 million instead of half of everything. No alimony, but he'd keep paying my health insurance for 5 years. He'd keep the penthouse, but pay me market-rate rent for my time living there. And yes, he'd agree to the non-disparagement clause. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything I deserved, but it was substantial, life-changing, $20 million, financial security for the rest of my life, freedom. "Take it," David advised. "You could probably push for more, but it'll mean a longer fight, more legal fees, more stress. This is a good deal, Alina." I thought about it for exactly 5 minutes. Then I told Jennifer to accept. The settlement was finalized 2 weeks later. The money was transferred to an account in my name only. $20 million, more money than I'd ever imagined having. Money that Marcus had tried to hide from me. Money he'd thought I was too stupid to find. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, relieved, free, like I'd been holding my breath for 8 years and could finally exhale. But there was one more thing I needed to do. One final piece of closure before I could fully move on. I asked to meet Marcus in person. Jennifer advised against it. "You got what you wanted. There's no reason to see him again." But I needed to look him in the eye one more time. Not as his wife, not as the woman he'd controlled and diminished. As his equal. As someone who'd beaten him at his own game. We met at a coffee shop in Midtown. Neutral territory. Public, so he couldn't make a scene. He looked terrible. The polish was gone. His suit was wrinkled. His hair needed cutting. He had bags under his eyes like he hadn't been sleeping. He'd aged 10 years in the 2 months since I'd left. He sat down across from me without ordering anything. Just stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger, maybe. Disbelief. Something else underneath. "You destroyed me," he said finally. "No," I replied. "I just refuse to let you destroy me. There's a difference. I'm going to lose everything. The board is pushing me out. Clients are leaving. My reputation is ruined. You did that to yourself. I just made sure everyone knew the truth." He laughed bitterly. "The truth? You went through my private files. You stole documents from my office. You violated my privacy in every possible way, and I'm the villain. You cheated on me for years. You hid millions of dollars. You gaslit me into thinking I was nothing without you. Yes, Marcus, you're the villain." We sat in silence. Around us, people ordered coffee and worked on laptops and lived their normal lives. None of them knew they were sitting next to a man whose world was collapsing. "I underestimated you," Marcus said quietly. "You were right about that. I thought you were weak, dependent, easy to control. I didn't think you had it in you to fight back." "You made me weak," I said. "Systematically over 8 years. You isolated me from my friends, convinced me to give up my career, made me doubt my own intelligence and capabilities. You tried to break me down into something you could manage, and it almost worked." Almost, but you made one mistake. You told me I'd regret leaving you, and that made me angry enough to remember who I used to be." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Respect. Grudging, bitter, resentful respect, but respect nonetheless. "What now?" he asked. "Now you move on with your life, and I move on with mine. You don't talk about me, I don't talk about you. We both pretend the last 8 years didn't happen." Just like that. Just like that. He stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I did love you, at the beginning, before everything got complicated." "No, you didn't," I said. "You loved the idea of me, the young, pretty, grateful woman who made you feel powerful. You never loved who I actually was because you never bothered to find out. And that's the saddest part of all of this, Marcus. You could have had a real partner, a real marriage, but you were too busy playing games to realize what you had." He didn't respond, just walked out of the coffee shop and out of my life forever. I sat there for a long time after he left, my coffee going cold, watching people walk by on the street outside. I felt lighter somehow. Like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't know was there and had finally set it down. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "Dinner tonight, want to celebrate your freedom." I smiled. Freedom. That's exactly what this was. I texted back, "Yes, I'm buying. I have a lot to celebrate." And I did. Not just the money, although that was significant, but something more important. I'd got myself back. The smart, capable, independent woman I'd been before Marcus. The one who'd been buried under 8 years of manipulation and control. She was still there. She'd always been there, just waiting for me to remember her. Marcus had been right about one thing. I did regret leaving him. I regretted not doing it sooner. 3 months after the settlement, I did something I hadn't done in 8 years. I went back to work. Not because I needed the money. $20 million meant I'd never need to work again if I didn't want to. But I needed purpose. I needed to remember what it felt like to create something, contribute something, be something other than someone's wife. I reached out to my old boss from the gallery, the one whose food poisoning had inadvertently led me to meet Marcus at that fateful gala. Catherine Brennan had moved on from the small Brooklyn gallery. She now ran the contemporary art division at Sotheby's. When I called her, I half expected her to not remember me. Or worse, to remember me only as the girl who'd abandoned her career to marry rich. "Elena Rossi," she said when she answered, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I wondered when you'd call. You heard about the divorce." "Sweetheart, everyone heard about the divorce. Marcus Wellington's scandal was the talk of the art world for weeks. A lot of people he screwed over were quite pleased to see him taken down a notch." She paused. "I heard you were the one who did it." "I just protected myself." "You did more than that. You exposed a fraud. That takes courage." Another pause. "So, what can I do for you? And please tell me you're not calling to sell off your art collection to spite your ex-husband, because as delicious as that would be, I think you're better than that." I laughed. It felt good to laugh. "No, I'm calling because I want to work again. I want to come back to the art world if you'll have me." "Elena, I'd hire you in a heartbeat. But you've been out of the game for 8 years. The art world moves fast. You'd essentially be starting over." "I know, and I'm ready for that." Catherine offered me a position as an associate specialist in her department. It was entry-level, far below what I might have achieved if I'd never left. The salary was laughable compared to what I was worth on paper now. But it was real. It was mine. It was something I earned through my own merit, not something given to me by a man who thought he owned me. I accepted immediately. My first day back felt like being reborn. I put on a simple black dress, professional but not designer. I took the subway, standing shoulder to shoulder with other commuters, something I hadn't done in almost a decade. I walked into that building with my ID badge and my coffee from the cart outside, and I felt more myself than I had in years. The work was challenging. I'd forgotten how much I didn't know, how steep the learning curve was, but I'd also forgotten how much I loved it. The research, the authentication, the stories behind each piece. Art was about truth, about capturing something real and making it permanent. After 8 years of living a lie, I craved that authenticity desperately. My colleagues were welcoming but curious. They knew who I was, knew about the settlement, knew I didn't need this job. But Catherine had made it clear I was there on merit, and slowly they accepted me. Not as Marcus Wellington's ex-wife, but as Elena, the woman who could spot a fake Rothko from across the room and who stayed late to help prepare for auctions. I started rebuilding my social life too. Sarah and I became close again, the way we'd been before Marcus. She introduced me to her friend group, people who worked in publishing and teaching and nonprofit work. People whose lives weren't defined by money or status. We had dinners in tiny apartments and went to free concerts in the park and split the check. It was ordinary and wonderful and everything my life with Marcus had never been. I even started dating, though nothing serious. A few coffee dates, one relationship that lasted 2 months before we mutually agreed we were better as friends. I wasn't ready for anything serious. Maybe I wouldn't be for a long time, but it felt good to be seen as Elena, not as Mrs. Wellington. To have men interested in my thoughts and opinions, not my connections or my settlement money. I bought an apartment in Brooklyn, not far from where I'd lived before Marcus. Nothing extravagant. A 2-bedroom with exposed brick and good light. I decorated it myself, with art I actually loved, furniture that was comfortable rather than impressive. I planted herbs on the fire escape and got a cat from the shelter, a grumpy orange tabby I named Rothko. This was my life now. Small, quiet, real, and I'd never been happier. But Marcus's life was going in the opposite direction. And honestly, watching it unravel was more satisfying than I'd ever admit out loud. The scandal didn't just cost him money. It cost him everything he'd built his identity on. Power, reputation, respect. The board of Wellington Investments forced him out 6 months after the settlement. They had no choice. Too many clients had fled, spooked by the revelations about the offshore accounts and the questions about tax evasion. The family firm his grandfather had built, his father had grown, the legacy he was supposed to protect, he destroyed it through his greed and arrogance. The IRS launched an investigation. I don't know all the details. Jennifer kept me updated on the broad strokes, but it was serious. Potential criminal charges. Fines that could run into the tens of millions. His lawyers were fighting it, of course, but the evidence David had uncovered made it difficult to deny. His social circle evaporated. Victoria, his mother, publicly distanced herself from him, releasing a statement about being disappointed in the choices her son had made. The country clubs dropped him. The charity boards asked him to step down. Invitations to galas and benefits stopped coming. He became persona non grata in the world he'd once ruled. And Amanda, she left him 3 months after the divorce was finalized. Apparently, Marcus without money and power was significantly less attractive than Marcus with them. She'd already moved on to a hedge fund manager, someone I heard through the grapevine. Someone with a younger wife he was probably cheating on too. History repeating itself. I didn't take pleasure in his suffering. That's what I told myself anyway, but I didn't feel bad about it either. He'd made his choices. He'd lied and cheated and hidden money and treated people like they were disposable. Now he was facing consequences. Real consequences, not the kind of minor inconveniences rich men usually faced before buying their way out of trouble. I thought that would be enough closure. I thought watching his empire crumble from a distance would satisfy whatever need for justice or revenge I had. I'd moved on with my life. I was happy. He was getting what he deserved. The story was over. But then, 10 months after the settlement, I saw him again. I was at an art opening in Chelsea, a new exhibition of contemporary photography that Catherine had encouraged me to attend for networking purposes. I was standing in front of a particularly striking piece, discussing it with a curator from MoMA, when I felt someone's eyes on me. I turned, and there he was, Marcus, standing across the gallery, holding a glass of cheap wine, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He looked awful, not just older but diminished somehow. His suit was off the rack, I could tell from across the room. His haircut was cheap. He'd lost weight, but not in a healthy way. He looked hollowed out, empty. I excused myself from my conversation and walked over to him. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe, or a desire to test myself, to see if I still felt anything when I looked at him. "Marcus, I didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," he replied. His voice was flat, lifeless. "I heard you were working again at Sotheby's." I'm actually enjoying it." "That's good, that's really good, Alina." He took a sip of his wine, grimaced slightly, probably used to much better. "You look happy." "I am happy." We stood in awkward silence for a moment. Around us, people mingled and discussed art and sipped wine. No one was paying attention to us. No one cared that we were standing there, the ex-husband and ex-wife, making stilted small talk. "Why are you here?" I asked finally. "Art openings were never your thing." He laughed bitterly. "They are now. Turns out when you're unemployed and unemployable, you have a lot of free time. I've been trying to, I don't know, find something that matters, something real. Art seemed like a place to start." "Since when do you care about what's real?" The words came out harsher than I intended. He flinched. "Since I lost everything pretending," he said quietly. "You were right, Alina. That day in the coffee shop, I never knew you. I never bothered to. I was too busy controlling you, shaping you into what I wanted to see who you actually were. And now," he gestured vaguely, "now I see you here in your element doing what you love, and I realize I never gave you the chance to do this when we were together. I kept you from it." "Yes," I said simply, "you did." "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean much now. I know it doesn't change anything. But I am sorry for all of it." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, of the charming liar I'd been married to. But all I saw was genuine regret, genuine pain. He meant it. "Why did you do it?" I asked. "The cheating, the lying, the money, you had everything. Why wasn't it enough?" He was quiet for a long time. "Because I'm fundamentally broken, I think. Because I was raised to believe that more was always better. More money, more power, more control. My father was the same way. And his father before him. We're good at building empires and terrible at building relationships. We take and take until there's nothing left to take, and then we're surprised when we end up alone." "You're not alone. You still have." "I have nothing," he interrupted. "My mother won't speak to me. My so-called friends disappeared the moment I couldn't help their careers anymore. The women I thought cared about me only cared about my money. Even my own company, my family's legacy, doesn't want me. I'm 47 years old and I have nothing and no one, and it's entirely my fault." I should have felt triumphant. This was the moment I'd fantasized about in those early days after I left. Marcus broken, alone, full of regret, facing the consequences of what he'd done, realizing what he'd lost. But standing there looking at him, I just felt sad. Sad for both of us. For the time wasted, the life we could have had if he'd been a different person. If I'd been stronger earlier, if everything had been different. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said finally. "I really do, but you're not going to find it at art openings or in apologies to your ex-wife. You need to figure out who you are when you're not trying to be your father or impress your mother or control everyone around you. That's the only way forward." "How did you do it?" he asked. "How did you start over?" I remembered who I was before you. And then I became someone new, someone better, someone who learned from the mistakes but didn't let them define her. He nodded slowly. "I'm glad you're happy, Alina. I mean that. You deserve it." "So do you," I said. "Eventually, when you've earned it." I walked away then, back to my conversation with the MoMA curator, back to my new life. I didn't look back to see if Marcus was still standing there. It didn't matter. He wasn't my concern anymore. But later that night, lying in my Brooklyn apartment with Rothko purring on my chest, I thought about that conversation, about Marcus's regret, about the fact that he'd been right all along. I did regret leaving him, not because I wanted him back, not because I missed the money or the lifestyle or anything about that life, but because I regretted all the years I'd wasted, all the time I'd spent being someone I wasn't, all the dreams I'd deferred and the friends I'd lost and the career I'd abandoned. But Marcus's regret was so much deeper. He regretted losing me, yes, but more than that, he regretted who he'd become, the choices he'd made, the person he'd turned into in pursuit of more. He'd had a woman who loved him, a successful company, respect and admiration, everything most people dream of having, and he'd thrown it all away because it wasn't enough. Because he always needed more money to hide away, more women to conquer, more control to exert. And in the end, trying to have everything, he'd lost it all. I, on the other hand, had lost everything and found myself, found a life I actually wanted to live, found work that fulfilled me, found people who valued me for who I was, not what I could offer them, found peace. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had told me I'd regret leaving, that I'd come crawling back, that I'd realize I was nothing without him. Instead, leaving him was the best decision I'd ever made. And staying with him, tolerating his lies and betrayal and manipulation, that would have been the real regret. 6 months after that chance encounter at the gallery, I heard through Catherine that Marcus had left New York, moved to somewhere quiet, she'd heard. Montana or Vermont or one of those places rich people went when they wanted to find themselves. I didn't ask for details. I didn't care. My life continued to flourish. I got promoted to specialist, then senior specialist. I curated my first major auction and it was a huge success. I started writing articles for art journals, rebuilding my reputation in the field. I traveled for work to Paris and London and Tokyo, seeing the art and the cities through my own eyes this time, not through Marcus's lens. I even fell in love again, though I was cautious about it. His name was James, and he was a professor of art history at NYU. He was kind and thoughtful and had no interest in controlling me or changing me. He loved that I was ambitious and independent. He encouraged me to take up more space, not less. He was everything Marcus had never been. We took things slow. I'd learned my lesson about rushing into relationships, about losing myself in someone else. But it felt good. It felt healthy. It felt like maybe I could have a real partnership, the kind built on mutual respect and genuine love, not control and manipulation. On the 2-year anniversary of leaving Marcus, I had a small dinner party at my apartment. Sarah was there, and some colleagues from Sotheby's and James. We ate pasta I'd made myself and drank wine that cost $15 a bottle and laughed until my face hurt. To Alina, Sarah toasted at one point, who taught us all that it's never too late to take your life back. Everyone raised their glasses. I looked around at these people, in my home that I'd chosen and decorated and paid for with money I'd earned, and I felt overwhelming gratitude. To second chances, I said, and to knowing your worth. We drank to that. And later, after everyone had left and James had kissed me goodnight at the door and I was alone with Rothko, I stood at my window looking out at the Brooklyn street below. Somewhere out there, Marcus was living with his regrets. Maybe he'd learned from them. Maybe he'd become a better person. Maybe he was still the same arrogant, entitled man he'd always been, just without the money and power to hide it. I hoped he'd changed, not for me, but for whoever came into his life next. I hoped he'd learned that people aren't possessions to be controlled, that love isn't about power, that having everything means nothing if you lose yourself getting it. But mostly, I hoped he understood what he'd lost. Not just me, but the chance at a real relationship, the opportunity to be a better man, the possibility of genuine happiness instead of shallow success. He'd told me I'd regret leaving, and he'd been absolutely right. I regretted not doing it on day one. As for Marcus, his regret would last a lifetime, because he'd finally realized that the only thing worth having in this world he'd destroyed with his own hands. And unlike money or power or reputation, some things once broken can never be bought back. That was the difference between us. My regrets taught me and freed me. His regrets haunted him and would for the rest of his life. And standing there in my small Brooklyn apartment, in my simple life full of real love and genuine purpose, I'd never felt richer.